When Daniel Reaves stepped off the bus in Wind Driver, Montana, the cold air hit him like a forgotten memory. He was 41, back from 18 years in the Army, with more scars than he could count, and an exhaustion so deep no amount of rest could cure it. Wind Driver was still a land of massive mountains and endless plains, a place where the silence had its own voice. But Daniel wasn't the same man who had left. He carried a backpack, a wrinkled photo of his unit, and an unopened letter from the VA he wasn't ready to face. All he wanted was to reach the house where he'd grown up. His younger brother, Evan, was waiting in the parking lot with his old pickup. He stepped out, looked at Daniel for a long moment, and then pulled him into a hug so strong it almost cracked the armor Daniel had built around himself. "Welcome home, Danny," Evan said, his voice thick with emotion. Daniel could only manage a quiet thanks, softer than he'd intended. Driving through Wind Driver was like stepping back in time, except he was the one out of place. This was a town where everyone knew everyone, and as he walked down Main Street, heads turned. Some eyes were curious, some respectful, and a few were just uncertain. Miss Harper, who ran the local cafe, rushed out to greet him. "My sweet boy is back," she exclaimed, wrapping him in a hug without asking. "If you need food, coffee, or just some quiet, you just ask." Daniel managed his first real smile of the day. "Quiet, mostly," he joked. Sheriff Mason, an old friend of his father's, gave him a nod from his patrol car. Life here had moved on, and for some reason, that stung. The family farm was a short drive from town, a modest house surrounded by fields and old trees. His mother had passed away years ago, and his father, unable to bear the loneliness, had moved to Arizona. The house was his now. He walked in through the back door. Everything was exactly as he remembered the photos on the walls. The worn wooden table, the rug that always caught your shoe. But the silence inside hit him harder than any explosion ever had. Evan watched him, his concern obvious. "You don't have to stay here if you don't want to," he said gently. "You can come stay with me and Sarah." "No," Daniel replied, taking a deep breath. "I need to get used to things, to myself." Evan understood and didn't push, but getting used to things was brutal. The nights were the worst. Daniel would jolt awake in a cold sweat, his heart pounding, hearing sounds that weren't there, the phantom thrum of helicopter blades over the Montana sky, the voices of comrades long gone. His body was still on patrol, even though his war was supposed to be over. He wasn't ashamed of the fear, but he couldn't make sense of it. One day, seeking a sliver of peace, he went to the lake where he used to fish as a kid. He sat on the edge of the dock, legs dangling over the dark water. The cold wind, the whisper of the forest, his own reflection, it all reminded him that he was alive. Sometimes, that was enough. But often, it wasn't. One morning, a different sound cut through the town's quiet, the rhythmic noise of a hammer. Drawn by curiosity, Daniel followed it to an old abandoned building on the edge of town. Peeking inside, he saw a woman with dark hair and strong, capable hands, building shelves with intense focus. "Need help?" Daniel asked, his voice startling her. She looked up, and a flicker of recognition crossed her face. "You're Reaves, right? Just got back?" "Yay, and you're Claire Dunhill," she said, brushing sawdust from her jeans. "Veteran too. Air Force." A wave of relief washed over Daniel. To find someone who understood without needing a long, painful explanation, it was like finding water in a desert. Claire told him she was restoring the building, turning it into a community center for local veterans. "I don't want anyone to go through what I went through alone," she said, her voice firm as she hammered another nail. "And I know I'm not the only one." Daniel thought of his sleepless nights, the ghosts in his room, the unopened letter from the VA. "I can help," he offered, the words coming out before he even thought them through. And just like that, something new began. For weeks, Daniel and Claire worked side by side. They painted walls, repaired broken windows, and arranged donated furniture. At first, they worked in comfortable silence, the sounds of their labor filling the space. Then, slowly, the stories started to come out. They talked about their losses, their fears, the good memories, and the terrible ones. There was no judgment, no pity, just shared understanding. Soon, they weren't alone. Other veterans started showing up. There was Mark, a Marine who'd lost the use of one arm. Lisa, a former Army medic who carried the heavy weight of the lives she couldn't save. And Tony, who'd been back for years but had never truly come home. The center became their sanctuary. It wasn't a place to forget the past, but a place to learn how to live with it. Daniel started sleeping a little better. He found he could breathe a little deeper. For the first time, he started to believe a future was possible. But healing is never a straight line. One evening, just as Daniel got back to the farm, his phone rang. It was Claire. Tony had disappeared. Everyone feared the worst. Daniel and Claire met the sheriff, and the three of them began searching, their flashlights cutting through the darkness of the woods. They called his name, their voices swallowed by the trees, following faint footprints in the fresh snow. Hours later, they found him by the river, shivering, his eyes fixed on the black water. Daniel approached him slowly, cautiously. "You're not alone," he said, his voice filled with a certainty he didn't know he possessed. "I'm not leaving you." Tony broke down, and as he cried, Daniel felt his own tears fall. Sometimes, that was all you could do. That night changed something deep inside Daniel. It wasn't just about fixing a building anymore. It was about holding a line for others. He had found a new kind of mission. Over time, the community center became the heart of Windriver. It hosted woodworking workshops, group therapy sessions, hiking trips, and game nights. It became a place of support, not just for veterans, but for their families too. The town started to see its veterans not as damaged heroes or distant figures, but as their neighbors' complex, valuable human beings. Daniel, without ever planning it, became a guide. He welcomed newcomers, organized activities, and most importantly, he listened. And one day, he looked around and realized he no longer felt like a visitor in his own life. He was home, not because Windriver had changed, but because he had. 2 years after that first bus ride, Daniel sat on his porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in hues of orange and purple. He didn't have all the answers. There were still hard days. The shadows hadn't vanished completely. But he had something he hadn't had in a long, long time. A place, a purpose, a life worth living. Claire walked up the steps with 2 mugs of coffee and sat beside him. They watched the last light fade in comfortable silence. "You know," she said, her gaze fixed on the horizon, "sometimes I think those of us who come back still have missions. They just look different now." Daniel took a sip of coffee and a slow, easy breath. He smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Yeah," he said, his voice calm and steady. "This one's mine." And for the first time since returning, he said it without a single trace of doubt.